Hi, welcome back to DROIDS Newsletter. I'm your host, Diana Wolf-Torres, the editor of DROIDS. Today on DROIDS, we're zooming in on why 2026 is starting to feel like an inflection point for robotics and physical AI. So let's start with the big picture. Analysts are increasingly describing 2026 as the year industrial robotics flips from nice to have to mandatory infrastructure. With labor markets still tight and supply chains being rebuilt, factories are seeing payback periods for new robots compressed to roughly 2 years or less. In other words, if you don't automate now, you risk falling behind on cost and throughput very quickly. And that sets the backdrop for some much more aggressive moves in humanoids and physical AI. Hyundai Motor Group is starting up what it calls the Robot Metaplant Application Center in the US, essentially a robot boot camp where humanoids are trained on real factory workflows before deployment. The plan is to start putting RMAC-trained Atlas units into repetitive sequencing tasks around 2028, then gradually move into more complex assembly roles by 2030. The message is clear. Humanoids are being treated as a future line item in production planning, not just YouTube content. More broadly, March is turning into a very busy month for humanoids worldwide. At Mobile World Congress, Honor used its stage time not only to launch phones, but to tease its first humanoid robot. Visually, it's a matte black biped with a single camera and light on the head and a blue lit torso, and it's pitched as part of a larger AI ecosystem strategy, signaling that the first real market will be China, with the rest of the world to follow if the experiment works. Honor is also trying to blur the line between smartphones and personal robotics with what it calls the robot phone. Think of a foldable flagship where the rear camera sits on a small robotic arm that can track subjects automatically. The marketing language leans into a super brain of AI. But underneath the hype, this is another example of OEMs using robotic elements and more autonomy as differentiators in a very crowded handset market. Meanwhile, the humanoid conversation continues to consolidate around a familiar set of names. Market research on the 2026 humanoid landscape still puts Tesla, Boston Dynamics, and Figure AI in the lead when it comes to pushing toward mass manufacturing and generalized deployment across logistics, manufacturing, and services. China's Big Five humanoid developers are also leaning in hard, from smaller forms like Unitree's G1 up to larger platforms aiming at warehouse and industrial use. The direction of travel is obvious. Everyone is racing to prove they can move from lab demo to production line at scale. On the industrial side, the longer-term forecasts are starting to line up with what we're seeing on the ground. Analysts looking at the global industrial robotics market out to 2046 keep coming back to the same drivers: AI and multimodal sensing on the robot, better real-time computer vision, and reinforcement learning for skill acquisition. Layer on top digital twins for factories and robot as a service models, and you get a world where spinning up a new automated cell starts to look more like subscribing to cloud infrastructure than buying a monolithic hardware asset. Healthcare is quietly becoming one of the strongest growth stories in all of this. The global medical robotics market is projected to grow from under $20 billion in 2026 to north of $70 billion by the mid-2030s, driven by surgical robots, interventional systems, and clinical automation. For hospitals and health systems, the bet is that robots can simultaneously expand capacity and standardize quality at a time when staffing is one of the hardest constraints. Finally, there's a brewing story at the intersection of robotics and AI ethics. In the broader AI world, we're already seeing pushback around military and defense work, and robotics is now squarely in that frame. A senior member of a major AI lab robotics team recently resigned over the company's new Pentagon partnership, citing concern about how frontier AI, robotics, and military applications are getting intertwined. It's a reminder that as physical AI moves from simulation into the real world, the stakes aren't just economic or technical, they're political and ethical as well. So to recap for listeners, Joel, robotics is hitting an economic tipping point. Humanoids are moving from viral videos toward actual industrial roadmaps, with Hyundai and Honor offering very different visions of what that looks like. Medical robotics is on track to be one of the largest and fastest growing segments of the entire field. And under it all, the ethics and governance conversation is starting to catch up to the pace of deployment. You've been listening to Droids. I'm Diana, and I'll be back tomorrow with more on the robots that are quietly reshaping everything from your factory floor to your phone.